I am Johnny Maney from Johnny's Restaurant and Takeaway, Wargassill, Cork, Ireland. We are delighted to sponsor the Sandy Kelly's Life and Time show.
Hot Country presents the life and times of Irish country music legend Sandy Kelly.
Hello, and you are very welcome to our first episode of a three-part series of the life and times of the wonderful Sandy Kelly. Sit back and relax, and I hope you enjoy her life story.
We're absolutely delighted to welcome Irish country music legend Sandy Kelly, also affectionately known as the showman's daughter to the life and times. Sandy, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Great to be here.
Take us back to where it all began for you. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Sligo, and that happened kind of by accident, if you like, because I come from a family of travelling fit-up entertainers. And my mother went back to Sligo, where she came from, so that I could be born. So as soon as I could, I suppose maybe I was 2 weeks old when I was brought away again and back out on the road.
And the family entertainment show was called the Dusky Dan's Travelling Variety Show.
Yeah, my grandfather was Dusky Dan, and he started travelling long before television. People didn't have TV in their homes at the time, certainly didn't have cinemas in rural Ireland. And he started a fit-up roadshow. There were quite a few of them at the time, in 1924, and went on the road with my grandmother, whom he met. She was 16 and he was 35.
Right.
And married with children. I don't think she knew that. And he threw the old glad eye on her. One day he was walking through St. George's Market in Belfast, and her mother had a bric-a-brac stall, second-hand clothes. And she would attract customers, my grandmother would, Maggie O'Dea, by singing. And she had a wonderful voice, and she was a wonderful yodeler. And my grandfather, passing through one day, him already a performer himself, banjo player, singer, vaudeville type thing, he would stop by more frequently, and eventually talked her into running away with him across the border, with the promise that he would make her a star, and she would sing in all these big theatres all over Ireland. Well, she ended up living in a very small caravan and being mother to 8 children and performing every night. So that's where it started.
Tell me about your brothers and sisters.
Well, first of all, I suppose my father, there were 8 siblings, and they would have been the people that did the show every night. It would have been a play, sketches. My uncle, my father's brother, was a magician and a hypnotist. My mother sang and played clarinet. My father was a comedian. And then following on from that, I was born. And when they brought me home from the hospital, they didn't have a cot. They couldn't afford a cot. So they put me into a drawer. Thankfully, they didn't close it. They kept it open. Right. And if they needed a baby for a play or something, they would just come take me out of the drawer and bring me on stage. My earliest memories would be from 3 years of age, tap dancing, singing, assisting the magician and whatever. And then, as you asked, my father, he would have taught me an awful lot, and my grandfather did too. So what a wonderful way to have learnt my craft, if you like. Children are like sponges, aren't they?
Right, yeah.
You know, so they would, soak up everything around them. So I soaked up all of this around me, and so learnt my craft as a very young child. And then I went on to, my brother sadly passed away. He came after me, and he passed away at 5 months old, tragically. And then my sister Barbara, whom you knew.
That's right.
She came 8 years after me, and there was just the two of us. And she sang with me, as you know, in the Eurovision and all that sort of stuff.
And what's your very favourite childhood memory growing up? I know you must have had many, but what's your favourite?
Just being on that show. I mean, we were so poor, but I didn't know it, because when somebody dresses you in sequins at 3 years of age, and you get to wear full makeup when you're only 3, it was a magical thing. Looking back even now, it was a magical time. And from a child, I got to stand on stage and look at an audience, a sea of faces smiling up at me and clapping and, adoration. And I think my childhood memories would all go back to that, you know.
Right. And who actually inspired you to become an entertainer?
Well, you know, I've been asked many times when I decided to be an entertainer and when I went into show business, but I don't actually remember that for the reasons I just said, because I came from a family of entertainers. And so, to be honest with you, I mean, this might sound strange to you, Hugh, but I actually didn't want to be an entertainer, you know, because I always did that 6 nights, 7 nights a week. When I was growing up, looking out of that little caravan window, I saw all the other children. They had houses, they had normal lives, they went to school. You know, they did all the things that I didn't do. And I used to say to my mother, you know, I'd like to be a real person like those children. I'd like to be have a real life.
Right.
But I didn't realise that, you know, I knew I was different, but I didn't realise that really I had been given a gift, the gift of show business and learning all about it at that early age. And so really, I never decided to be in show business. I was born into it, you know. From the minute they put me in that drawer, I was in it, you know.
And when did you kind of move over to country music from
well, as you would know, because I know you many years, you would know that I was with the Duskies, and we were very much, when I came back from, I lived in South Wales for some time and came back when I was 19, joined the Fairway Show Band. I always sang the Emmylou Harris songs, the Linda Ronstadt songs, the Crystal Gale songs, and they were the songs, I think having listened to my grandmother, who was a great country singer, they were the songs that I could identify with and put passion into. And so I decided the year before we did the Eurovision in 1982 that I was going to change over to country music. And as the song goes, I was country when country wasn't cool. Everybody thought I was mad. And so I got on to Kevin McCooey, whom you know very well, I'm sure, Big Tom's manager. And I said, look, I want to sing country music. It's where my heart is. And thankfully, Kevin McCooey signed me up. And in 1983, the year after the Eurovision, I joined Kevin. He put a band together, and my first record was If I Needed You, which was a duet with Big Tom.
That's right. And tell us about the Eurovision.
Wow, it was amazing. You know, we were so convinced that we wouldn't win the National Song Contest because we had a song called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, which wasn't a very good song. And so we didn't think we'd win. And so convinced were we that we wouldn't win that we actually took a gig that night to play at a dance. So we would do the National Song Contest. In our heads, we'd lose, and we'd all get into the van and go to the National Ballroom and do a gig. We won.
You won, yeah.
Yeah, and RTE threw this big party at the studios, and everybody else went to our party except us.
You had to go to the dance.
We had to go play a gig. And to represent your country, you know, in any field or in any subject, there's an overwhelming sense of pride. And I think although we didn't have a huge amount of faith in the song, we had huge pride in representing our country, and I think we gave it 100%. And back then we came 11th, which wasn't very good back then, but by today's standards,
should be very good.
It wasn't that bad, was it?
Yes, true, yeah.
And the audience was huge.
And Sandy Kelly, who are some of your musical influences?
There again, going back to my grandfather Dusky Dan and my grandmother Maggie, would have been my early influences. And then growing up, Linda Ronstadt, Emmylou Harris. Oddly enough, although I respected Patsy Cline hugely, I can't honestly say she was an influence. And when I was asked in 1989 to record Crazy, I refused to do it. Shay Hennessy from Crash Records said, Sandy, you know, your first country album got great airplay and all of that, but not very many people bought it other than your own family and friends. So you need to do some Patsy Cline songs. And I said, well, no, I saw myself as a kind of Shania Twain type person back then, and pictures were taken standing in the sea in a miniskirt in Portmarnock in November, which wasn't very comfortable. But I didn't realise that I really needed to sing the big ballads. So I recorded Crazy in 1989, and that changed my whole life.
And Sandy Kelly, going back to the very start, can you remember the very first song you recorded?
I can very well, because would you believe it, I'm learning it at the minute for the new tour.
All right.
Because the tour is doing a sort of a journey through my career. And the first song I recorded was in the Eamon Andrews studio in Dublin in 1974, and it was a song called Come Back Billy Joe. Come back Billy Joe,
Right.
your mama needs you. And it was recorded by Cliff Richards, and it came second in the English National Song Contest. The song that came first, he sang all of the songs, and people voted for the song. And the song that came first was Congratulations.
All right, Cliff Richard.
Yeah, and so the B-side of Congratulations was Come Back Billy Joe. It was my first record and did very well.
And was that the very first song you heard yourself singing on radio?
Yeah, yeah, and back then you had the sponsored programs. Do you remember that?
I do indeed.
And so you could turn your radio on and you knew when you were going to be on, unlike today when you don't know if you're ever going to be on the radio.
That's right.
You knew exactly when you were going to be on the radio, and you could get into your car, turn your radio on, and there you were. And my grandfather, Dusky Dan, we were very, very close, as you can imagine. And I went and I told him I have a record coming out, and he was so proud. And he ordered 7 records for 7 remaining children. And sadly, a week before the record was released, he passed away.
Right.
I was with him when he passed away. But I always remember that, you know, how proud he was.
I am Johnny Maney from Johnny's Restaurant and Takeaway, Wargassill, Cork, Ireland. We are delighted to sponsor the Sandy Kelly's Life and Time show.
Tell me about your sister, Barbara.
Well, there again, because we know each other so well, you and I, you would know how close I was to Barbara. I was 8 years older than her, and because my mother had a brain hemorrhage when she was 39, and I became her carer with my father, and so Barbara was only 8 years old when my mum got sick, and so I became over the years more of a mother figure than a sister, really, and that came with its problems because I was the one that had to tell her what she could and couldn't do. And so, you know, sisters at the best of times will have, you know, the odd disagreement and
Right.
falling out. But in that case, I was sister and mother, you know. And then when she was 15, and she didn't like school very well, she decided she wanted to join my band. And uninvited, I didn't really want her
Right.
in the band at the
Right.
time. But she decided she was going to join the band, so brought her to the first gig. I can't remember where it was. It was in a big hall somewhere. And she started singing anyway, and oh my God, it was so bad, awful. So I remember running around and closing all the windows in the hall in case anybody would hear her.
Right.
And they might think it was me and they wouldn't come to the dance.
Oh, right.
So it was that bad.
Right.
But as you know, she went on to become
A great singer.
a great singer.
Yeah.
Represented Ireland in the Eurovision when she was 18. She was on all my TV shows for the series. Came to Nashville with me almost every time. Was on all the Johnny Cash tours, you know. So I think in a way it was a little bit sad that it's kind of like that song I sang for her, The Wind Beneath My Wings,
All right.
where, you know, she was always in my shadow. And that happens, you know, when one person becomes, you know, more famous and the other person is in the shadow, you know. And I always think about that with Barbara, that she was a little bit in my shadow. And I thought, you know, she was so talented herself and so different to me, really,
Right.
that she deserved maybe her own career, you know.
Right.
Obviously, you know, she passed away in tragic circumstances, and that grief never leaves you. It walks along beside you, and somehow you learn to, you know, to manage it and keep going. For Barbara's daughter, Sandy, she had one child, is 27 in April, and she's gone on to go through university and have a great career and is a wonderful girl, and I have a grandson, and so I have lots of reasons to keep going and
Right.
be positive, you know.
And do you want to talk about the tragedy about Barbara? Or?
Yeah, I talk about, you know, Barbara took her own life. Comes with suicide and somebody taking their own life, an awful lot of unanswered questions. In my case, what if? What if I'd been there? What if I'd knocked on her door? What if I'd understood more about the mental illness. Barbara didn't talk about it. You know, we knew that she was struggling, but we didn't know exactly how much or how difficult it was, because she didn't share that with us. And because we were so close, I don't understand. You know, in hindsight, when you think back, and there's so much conversation now and awareness about mental health, there's a lot of things I think I could have done, but I didn't know.
Right.
You know, so I think awareness is a huge thing. What I wouldn't give to have her back, and what I wouldn't give to be able to change a lot of things about back then, but I can't.
Yeah.
You know.
Sandy, did you ever work at anything else except entertaining in some form or some fashion?
Well, there again, going back to the beginning, you know, when you said, did I always want to be an entertainer? I wanted to not be an entertainer, because when you're in show business all your life, it doesn't hold any mystique or illusions of any great grandeur, you know. So I wanted to be a real person. So I did very well at school. I had to leave my family's show when I was almost 9 and go to live with my grandmother and go to school. And I did very well at school, and I wanted to be a teacher initially. And so we moved to South Wales when my mother became ill, and I became an accountant's clerk.
Right.
And loved it.
Right.
But I was singing at night.
Yeah.
And so my family were dependent on me to make, you know, to support them financially. So I was making £10 a week as an accountant's clerk, but I was making £10 a night singing.
Right.
And we would work 4 nights a week in workmen's clubs.
Yeah.
And then my mother gradually got sicker and sicker, you know, and so it was decided for me that I would give up the accountancy. So I did. I was a normal person for a
short time.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I came back to being who I am now.
I am Johnny Maney from Johnny's Restaurant and Takeaway, Wargasil, Cork, Ireland. We are delighted to sponsor the Sandy Kelly's Life and Times.
His daughter is a great title. Who christened you that, or how did that title become?
It was something I would hear, you know. As you can imagine, you know, living in a, like I said to you, I have this great memory of people looking up at me and applauding and smiling at me as a child, you know, because I was young and cute and tap danced and sang Shirley Temple songs.
Right.
But then if I wasn't on the stage, you know, if I just went to the shop or when I went to live with my grandmother and go to school, I was looked upon very differently because of my background and my culture, which is something I've always been proud of and always talked of. I was never embarrassed that we lived in caravans, and but we were treated differently, and some people did look down upon us.
Right.
And you know, thinking back, you know, if you were on the stage, that was one thing, but if you went to the shop, people were a little bit awkward around you. And I remember hearing, when I'd go down the street in a town we were in with the show, or when I went to live with my grandmother, I would hear, oh, she's the showman's daughter.
All right.
Or I would hear, she's the showgirl. You know, and it was in my mind, and I don't know what makes people do this, but my grandmother had a trunk in the house that she brought from America. My mother was born in America. That she brought from America when she worked as a scullery maid. And we were never allowed to go near that trunk because she didn't have very much, but whatever she had was in this trunk. So I decided I would go looking for my birth certificate,
Right.
which was very clever if you think about it for a child.
Right.
To make some sense of this showman's daughter thing. And I went into the trunk one day. She was gone down the village, and sure enough, there was my birth certificate. And it said on it, father's occupation, showman, which made me the showman's daughter.
Very good.
And from then on, and when RTE gave me my own series back in 1990, they did a documentary that went out the night before the first show, and which showed some footage from the show of me when I was 6, that was shot out in Achill, right up to working with Johnny Cash. And they said to me, what would you like to call your documentary? And I said, I want you to call it The Showman's Daughter, because it's something I'm proud of.
A great title, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Sandy...
And actually there's a song on the new album which my son wrote, called The Showman's Daughter.
Right. Actually, tell us about, you then went on to marry Mike, and of course you had sons and daughter. Briefly tell us about that.
Well, I joined the Fairways show band. Tom Kelly rang up and asked me to audition for the Fairways when I was just 19. And I wasn't a bit interested because I felt like I'd been in show business 150 years when I was 19. But anyway, he offered me £30 to go and do the audition. And I needed the £30, so I went. I had no intentions of taking the job, but I went down to Newport with my friend in the car, and we were laughing our heads off because there was no way I was going on the road with a band.
Right.
I came home with the €30 and he must have rang I don't know how many times. And every time he rang, the post box was up the village and somebody would hear the phone ringing and they'd go in and answer it, leave it off the hook, and they'd have to come down to the caravan and get me to go up and answer the phone.
Right, right.
They'd say, we're looking for Phil Ellis, is my name.
Yeah.
And so they say, we're looking for Phil Ellis. Oh yeah, hold on a minute. I go down and get her. And they go all the way down and knock on my door. There's somebody on the phone, Tom Kelly. So I joined the Fairways, and Mike, who's Tom's brother, was the bass player in the band. And really it started out as a friendship. We just sat beside each other in the van. I had a very strict upbringing that you didn't, well, at that point in time I wouldn't have had a boyfriend anyway, but you didn't date anybody that you worked with in show business. That wasn't a done thing. And so I was very against going out with Mike. But one day on the way to Carnival or something down, maybe in Cork, the van stopped and he offered to buy me a cone, an ice cream cone. And I got the cone, and we're standing at the back of the van, and he said, will you go with me? And I said, go where? You know, and
Right.
he says, will you go out with me? Like, and I said, well, go out where?
Yeah.
And I said, no. And that was, the first thing was no. And after about a month of looking at him like a lost kitten or a lost puppy, I said, look, shall I go out with him once just to cheer him up, you know?
Yeah.
I had no interest at all. And the rest was history. And then we were together. We're divorced, as you know, but he's my best friend. And that's why a good relationship is built on friendship.
Right.
And we have a history together. We have 2 children. We have a grandchild. And he's, you know, one of my closest friends. But we divorced, I think, maybe 15, 16 years ago.
Right. Of all the songs you've recorded, Sandy, which 3 would be your favourites?
Well, I would have to say Crazy, even though I didn't want to record it. It changed my life and was the reason Johnny Cash asked me to work with him. Woodcarver, because I recorded it with Johnny Cash. And I suppose the third one would have to be Against the Wind, which I recorded with Willie Nelson.
All right.
Because I never thought, I recorded Crazy with Willie Nelson. He wrote Crazy, as you know.
That's right.
And when I recorded Crazy with Willie Nelson, we went to record just that one song. And he had just come off a tour with the Highwaymen, and I was in Nashville waiting to go to the recording studio, and a phone call came to say Willie Nelson is pulling by in his tour bus and he's picking you up to go to the studio. Well, I never met. Can you imagine if somebody told you Willie Nelson was pulling up in his tour bus? And I thought, oh my God, so what do you say to Willie Nelson, you know? But he pulled up in the tour bus. I went down. He stood at the steps. It was only him, the driver, and he had a mug of coffee in his hand. I got in the bus and he said, would you like a coffee? He made me a coffee. And we listened to the songs. He had a wee tape recorder, and we listened to the songs, Crazy and Against the Wind. And we went to the studio. We ended up recording 4 songs. We did Every Time You Need a Friend. Do you remember I used to finish my show with that?
Yeah, yeah.
And we did Crazy, we did Against the Wind. And we have one song that's yet to be released. He said to me, would you like to do another song? And I said, yeah, why don't we do a Christmas song? So we recorded Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire,
Lovely.
which has not yet been released.
Right.
So,
And tell me, Sandy, what's your favourite country song of all times?
what's my
By
favorite?
anybody, by any artist, what would be your favourite song?
You know, I Am a Highwayman.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, going way, way back, I would have had other songs, you know, that I would have loved. But I love that song because it moves me every time that I hear it, because I know the people who sang it, Chris Christopherson, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Johnny Cash.
Right.
I got to work with those 4 people.
Right. That's some
And
achievement.
share a stage with those 4.
Absolutely.
If you think about that little girl that was 3 years old,
Yeah.
living in a caravan,
Yeah.
you know,
Unbelievable.
to
What,
have had that chance.
what's your most treasured possession?
The spirit mantle that Johnny Cash made for me.
Right.
And
Tell us about that.
How that came about. You might remember, you know, when you see him on stage, and Willie Nelson as well, they have this sort of red, white and
Oh,
blue
yes,
spirit
that's
mantle
right,
with the
yes.
nickels on it.
Yeah.
And we were on tour. And I said to him, kind of when I got to know him, I got a little bit cheekier. When I met him first, I didn't have much to say at all, as you can imagine. But then I realised he was just a really nice person. And I said to him, when we'd be sitting on the bus, the tour bus, he always sat on the left and June always sat on the right. And you'd see his hand coming up like this. And his hobby was sewing. And he had a little tin box with all needles and threads in it.
All right.
And he used to collect military vintage buttons
Right.
and badges. And he didn't always wear black. If he wasn't working, he used to have like khaki jackets, and he used to sew the badges on them. And he used to sew them on hats. And so he'd be doing that in the bus. So he made his own spirit mantle. A spirit mantle is an Indian necklet, if you like, and it's got all the different signs on it. And so I said to him one day, kind of half joking, would you think about making me a spirit mantle? And he said, I will. Of course, I never thought in a million years that he'd
Right.
even remember it.
Right.
And then the following Christmas, a shoebox came in the post. And I knew he had packaged it himself because it was so badly done. It was like he got a roll of sellotape and he just kept going around the shoebox
Right.
like that.
Right.
It took me forever to get it open.
Yeah.
And in the box was a little white satin cushion and the spirit mantle that he had made for me, with a handwritten letter from him explaining the significance of the spirit mantle, the Indian spirits, the nickels that were on it. There was the sign of the sun. It was for love and peace, happiness, and health. And so he hand wrote this letter to me, and saying how much he enjoyed recording Woodcarver.
I am Johnny Maney from Johnny's Restaurant and Takeaway, Wargassill, Cork, Ireland. We are delighted to sponsor the Sandy Kelly's live
Family and being at home. If you were to ask me what's my biggest regret in life, it's being away from my family and my children especially so much.
Right.
In the earlier years, you know, fame is a bubble and it only lasts a certain time. You know,
Yeah.
these days I live on the coattails of who I used to be.
Right.
Fame doesn't last.
Yeah.
And back then, once I got on a treadmill of being famous, whatever that means, I was away from my children so much in America and everywhere, and that's a regret for me.
What gives you more satisfaction?
What gives me the most satisfaction now is I know the hurt of missing my children, and now what gives me satisfaction is to be at home. I've always loved a table, with a dining table and chairs, because we never had that. You know, when we were growing up, we didn't have that.
Right.
You stood up when you were eating, you didn't sit down. And we certainly didn't have a table. So the one thing I've always treasured in my house is a table. And would you believe that this last Christmas, for the first time I think in 20 years, I got a new table
Right.
and dining chairs. And what I love most is cooking a meal, which I do once a week. And I have my family. There are empty chairs. My father's chair is empty. My mother's chair is empty. My sister's chair is empty. But I still feel them around that table. And so I treasure the people that are still there and can still be at the table. And that's what I love most, is being at home with my children.
And Sandy Kelly, what has been the highlight, or indeed highlights, of your career to date?
Johnny Cash, you know,
Again,
he
yeah.
changed my whole life. You know, I don't want to sort of smoosh over or not talk about what Patsy Cline did for my life, because, you know, I ended up working with her band, her producer, her guitar player became my producer, her husband. Before I ever recorded a Patsy Cline song, before I ever learned Crazy, they became friends of mine.
Right.
And her daughter Julie today is still a big friend. So I don't want to dismiss that, because that was certainly very important to me in my career. But when Johnny Cash came to Ireland and took the time to ring me and say that he liked what I did,
Right.
and recorded with me, like, what was, you know, Hugh, what was the chances of that?
That's right.
You know.
And tell me, what has been the most embarrassing moment of your career to date?
Most embarrassing moment probably was for the rehearsals of the Eurovision. They bring in an audience, a full audience, and back then in 1982 you had your full orchestra. You had Noel Keelan conducting the orchestra, and it was, you know, it was a fantastic thing. Once that orchestra started, it lifted the whole room. So they brought in a full audience for the night before pre-rehearsals, and you may remember there was 4 of us, and we had a sidestep, you know, and the song had, I think we're in the history books of having the most la 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 la.
Yeah.
And so we went to the left, 4 people, and only 3 came back. I fell off the stage.
Right.
So I miscalculated where I was going, so that was the most embarrassing thing.
Earlier you said you recorded a duet with Big Tom McBride. Tell us about that.
When I decided, once I decide to do something, I've always had this trait. I do it, and I probably will chance my arm and talk to anybody, you know, to get it done. And when I decided I wanted to be in country music, when I rang Kevin McCooey, I said to Kevin, is there any chance at all that, you know, Big Tom would endorse me?
Right.
Because I was coming from a pop background, rock background. And he said, well, Tom really is very shy and very quiet, and he certainly had never recorded with a female at that point.
Right.
And I think the only other person since is Margot, isn't it?
That's right.
So he said, I'll talk to him, but I wouldn't hold out much hope. And immediately, Big Tom came forward and said to Kevin, I'll record 2 songs with Sandy. I was Sandy Dusky at that time.
Right.
Changed to Sandy Kelly for the country music. And brought me up to his studio in Castleblaney. And we recorded If I Needed You, and we recorded Fools, which was on the B-side. And it went to number 1 on the country charts. And then he brought me on his shows, and he would get me up to sing the duets. Now, the funny part of that I remember was some of Big Tom's, not all of them, but a little group of them, of his fans, took huge exception to him singing with me.
Right.
Any woman, wasn't me, just me. So at some point in the show, they'd know I was coming on the stage to sing the duet, and they would leave. And I would always know this group of women would get up and they were going to leave and go to the bathroom or whatever, but they wouldn't stay in the room while I was singing with Tom, because that was a no-no.
They didn't want it?
No, didn't want it, no. But Big Tom, you know, as much as Johnny Cash, Big Tom helped my career.
And what are the 3 things that you can't live without?
Well, people or things?
Things.
Things.
Well, it's about 3 things. People, it could be included too, but it's about family.
Yeah, family would be one, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Because I think when you go through the process, as we've talked about, of losing people that are close to you, only then you realise how important it is to have them and spend time with them, you know. Definitely a glass of white wine.
Right.
I love my glass of white wine, and I would absolutely hate to have to go without a glass of white wine. And have no problem saying that. I mean, I've timed it from where I live. I live in Strandhill, County Sligo, and I get to look at the Atlantic every day.
Right.
Good days, bad days, it looks beautiful. And from my front door to my local pub, walking is 3.5 minutes.
Oh, well, you're close enough, so.
Close enough. And during writing that book and learning those songs for that album, come 11 o'clock at night, when I had to go back in my mind and think about things I didn't want to think about, I'd put the pen down and I'd be in my pyjamas, wouldn't have taken them off all day because I would be writing, take off the pyjamas, put on a tracksuit, 3.5 minutes I'd be sitting at the bar with farmers.
Right.
Not talking about music, not caring, they wouldn't care about music or Johnny Cash or anything else, having a laugh and having a glass of white wine. So that's 2.
Yeah.
3, I think, I never thought I'd say this, but I think my pets. I never wanted pets. My daughter, who's special needs, as you know, she has a Bernese Mountain Dog, wasn't trained as a care dog, but is a care dog for her.
Right.
And she's big. She's the size of a bear, Coco. So her, and then I inherited young Sandy's dog because my sister bought a large dog for her just prior to her passing away. So I have 2 big dogs, and I inherited it, my sister's 18-year-old cat,
Right.
18 this year. So, you know, I've come to realise that they're like family. They're fantastic.
That's it for part 1. Join me again next week for part 2, and I look forward to seeing you all then.
I am Johnny Maney from Johnny's Restaurant and Takeaway, Wargasil, Cork, Ireland. We are delighted to sponsor the Sandy Kelly's Life and Time show.